I'd like to invite you to listen to this audio for the purpose of learning and obtaining concepts that you may have not thought about. Let me begin by saying, this subject is one that will test your own integrity and challenge your present methods in practicing forgiveness. Harbored feelings are a result of not forgiving whomever may have been the culprit. It facilitates hatred. Before I talk about this subject matter, I'd like to inform you of several things. I'll start with 4 questions. 1. How do you feel towards others? 2. Do you feel abandoned and unloved? 3. Have you been told you were not good enough? And 4. When was the last time you felt taken for granted or misused? I would say that an extensive amount of us have experienced one or all of these in our course of life. Having said that, it's not gainful to go around blaming a person for their preset ways when the bulk of their actions are derived from uninvestigated childhood tribulations. It takes a massive amount of time and effort to change your habits once they have been formed, especially those that were gathered from birth to age 6. The job to change is laborious, but with intent and determination, bad habits can be eliminated. It just depends on the individual. If a person is unhealthy, they will be prone to remain that way until proper diagnosis and treatment has been performed. This applies to physical and mental ailments too. I came across an article that was titled, "Why Your Child's Brain is Like a Sponge." The first sentences were from a quote that is fitting for this exact explanation. It read, quote, "The absorbent mind is one of the most important ideas in early childhood education. The absorbent mind makes our adult lives possible." End quote. That's profound, yet true. The way we behave is a construction of our primitive years, those developmental years where we grow from not knowing how to say a word to being able to run for the first time or ride a bike. That is why parenting is nothing to be taken lightly, nor irresponsibly. A child needs a father and a mother in this equation, otherwise the scales will be uneven and burdensome. Even so, inadvertently, by your parenting skills or the lack thereof, there's a potentiality that you may be cultivating a hero or a villain. Usually, the first exposure of a guardian figure outside of the parents is at the kindergarten level, when kids are displaying attributes learned at home. It's the initial phase of these little people expressing their premature personalities and conduct. The objective is to instill basic learning, but consistently, teachers have become more like a babysitter with a license to professionally educate. Aside from those parents who choose to homeschool their children, which can propose a different type of problem if not done properly, these teachers have a first-hand experience to witness the inclinations of these children. The reason for parent-teacher conferences is to report the progression or regression of the child so that the parent can get an outlook to how well the child will be in society as a citizen. They're still moldable at this stage, but if the child has poor conduct, the parents will try to compensate for that poor conduct to the best of their abilities. And if the child's reports are good, then parents tend to be supportive and promotional, as they should. The point here is to understand that a child will only display behaviorisms that they are accustomed to hearing and seeing at home. This is why I stated in my first episode, if you want to know why a person behaves or socializes the way they do, then look at their household. Every day, we interact with different personalities, exposed to different beliefs, and a quantity of opinions. It's a good thing to have such a variety of exposure, and I think it would be quite boring if everybody had the exact same personality and perspectives. But if you don't have the emotional intelligence or meekness in filtering what you agree or disagree with, then you'll find yourself gullibly affected. A good relationship of any kind is not without forgiveness. That relationship cannot flourish if there isn't at least a 70% effort of accountability in the group or amongst a couple who are in the pursuit of a dyadic romance. It's a good place to start when encountering new things in new places, because in each one of those categories, there will be human beings. It's interesting if you think about those two words, human being. Yes, we are incredibly made into existence with a complexity of genetic and biological nuances, but we are also organisms being something, being creative, being friendly, being social, or being a nerd, which is a negative connotation of a geek, but the word describes a person who has a great interest in intellectual stimulation. After all, by acquiring education, these people have increased their vocabulary and have the capability to clearly express in detail about a matter. Therefore, a nerd can be anyone who is extremely enthusiastic and knowledgeable about a single subject and can communicate intelligently what they are feeling internally. Given the opportunity, a person will divulge interesting facts about themselves with excitement to elaborate on their ideologies. People love to talk about themselves because of the sense to feel important. I'll talk more about that later. It's an unfortunate event to experience such dismay in terms of emotional and psychological abuse, but we all have been in some sort of situation that made us emotionally uncomfortable. Trauma has a primary effect to the way we perceive and associate with things. Sensory receptors for one person are abstractly different compared to another. We develop these sensory associations in our infancy and toddler years, and they either make us become rational or dysfunctional. Our bodies adapt to the environment we are in. This is how we gain an awareness of the world. After researching, I concluded that physiologists are harmonious in their statements about this also. According to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, they said, quote, "The human body can achieve an understanding of the world through its sensory systems. Sensory systems are widespread throughout the body, including those that detect the world directly from the outside, those that detect information from internal organs and processes, and those detecting sense of position and load." End quote. They also added this statement, quote, "Sensory receptors occur in specialized organs such as the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, as well as internal organs. Each receptor type conveys a distinct sensory modality to integrate into a single perceptual frame eventually." End quote. For instance, if a child's parents are neglectful and mutually aggressive in their habits, the child will associate these behaviors as normal. As the child matures into adulthood, the potential of these same habits being portrayed are sadly high. It's a subconscious programming by observation that's taking place as the child's environment warrants. It's the perceptual frame. Having a relationship means having a relation. It means you are relating yourself with the public in a plethora of ways at a risk. Now, that risk isn't necessarily life-threatening unless you found yourself in a diabolical position. But overwhelmingly, people are involving themselves in illogical affairs. This is why this forgiveness thing is so important. It's a sympathetic action, and it entails being aware of other people's feelings or what is sensitive to another. To care for a person intrinsically brings joy to the one who's giving it. Likewise, to project forgiveness onto people will essentially bring peace to the one who projects it. You remain tranquil when you have subjected yourself to the rule of letting things go. This business of forgiving is concrete to have a sustainable life. If you count it productive to inappropriately ignore or fail to address an issue, then you are appropriately accepting it. It will be better to acknowledge the feeling rather than pushing it aside. Doing this enough times will create psychological barriers, and you will build inconspicuous walls that go undetected. It's your right to live as a recluse so that you don't have to deal with socializing and potential disagreements that challenge your beliefs. But is that really living? Whoever lived a life without an acute risk at stake? In the betterment of my observation, the best ways to get through life if you choose to just live a robotic, undesired existence are being humble, knowing that nothing is to be taken as promised. You may be alive today, but could be dead in the next hour. Realizing that though you are amongst the living, there's someone who is amongst the dead altogether. It's about living each moment of your life like a gift, as you are present. Then there's understanding, acknowledging the fact in which everyone has free will, as I mentioned in my previous episodes. So far in this country, we still have freedom to express ourselves as long as we don't try to annihilate the rights of another. Finally, forgiveness. These 3 pillars will resolutely guide you to having a worthy life spent. That's the objective for each and every one of us, and that's to be valuable so that we can live a commendable life. How are you doing in the department of life? Are you cashing in on the time given to you each day? Is it being spent wisely? Well, I hope for you that it is. Speaking of time, when are you going to consider forgiving those who may have hurt you? How long are you going to hold grudges that do not add substance to your well-being, but only extract? I can recall hearing this statement from one of my relatives, and he said, "Some people always wear their hearts on their sleeves." At the time, I didn't understand the metaphor with my teenage mindset, but the saying has truth in it. A large sample of people openly show how they feel based on their external appearance or gestures. Take a person with massive mutilation of tattoos, gauges, or piercings on their bodies. Surely there are internal dilemmas that are possessing the person to inflict personal pain just to personify their body as a human mural. It's their way of masking what hasn't been healed within them. It's a pattern that has been learned because none of us come out of the womb with any designs or markings on our bodies. That's a learned culture rather than something that's natural. Certain matters can be hazardous when it comes to this, or even criminal. And it's all based on the underlying emotional trauma which has not been addressed in a healthy manner. This is why deception and manipulation has become increasingly frequent. This also applies to those who have an odd desire in being attracted to toxicity. A prime example is the invention of capitalization by elicitation. Today we can identify one of them as the internet-based platform, OnlyFans. It's nothing more than modern-day solicitation of sex, nudity, and evidence of virtual prostitution. The dysfunctional levels of the account owners and users are ever increasing, and it confirms how these people have had lack of love, nurture, and structure in their childhood. It's another case of compensation and their methods of soothing. Remember, during the early childhood stages, the absorbent mind makes our adult lives possible. To resort to over-sexualizing yourself for financial gain because users can purchase content that is offered by the account owners, and to have no discretion at all, shows that all of these people have a mental disposition. They have no dignity or self-worth. These type of behaviors are borderline self-sabotaging. What sane and self-respecting individual would gravitate to such a community to uniformly degrade themselves? The answer is none. If anything, they would prefer a level of privacy in their act of sexual pleasures or seductions. To broadcast it and have the footage accessible to strangers is beyond indecent. Can you imagine the potential damages in character as these individuals reach ages 50 or even older? The internet has been undefeated for storing images or videos alike. So, once you publish a content nowadays, it will be recorded and uploaded forever. Well, no need to talk about defamation of character. The platform accounts are held by 95% of women throughout the world, while men are the holders of the remainder. Based on the registered statistics, women are receiving monetary gain by subscribers at a 70% rate. These percentages are quite disturbing if you figure there's about 8 billion people in the world, and 49.5% are women, according to the United States Census Bureau. Earlier, I mentioned that people desire to feel a sense of importance. This is not particularly a bad thing. The only bad thing about this is that the level of being important has been inflated. Everyone wants to be famous and recognized as a VIP. What's wrong with being average? Nothing at all in my book. Matter of fact, average is what built the world. Average is the majority, and these people are the true VIPs in retrospect. Now, this doesn't mean that just because a person is average, there isn't a level of emotional instability. All of us have background issues, and some can care less to fix them. The concern is that we end up with a numerous amount of disorderly functional individuals. Ultimately, this group of people become incorrigible as they age. I suppose that's why the terminology was created when people say, "He is stuck in his ways." Be that as it may, a mentally ill person isn't good for no one, and they can be an encumbrance. The neglect of proper nurture and care during early childhood contributes to the countless examples of attention seekers today. and they can be noticed by their overly expressed sensuality or flaunting materials to compensate for something they are insecure about. All of these mental conditions are patterns of the heart, which is showcased outwardly, sometimes strange or bizarre. Isn't it recurrent to see a man or a woman with unnatural pigmentation in their hair? It's delusional at best when you can't help but notice these people looking like trolls or seeming to have a disorient celebratory act of Halloween. You know, having a good library will keep your mind fresh with ideas and teach you practical notions. I recommend it. Remember, being a nerd is common within everyone. You might not appear to be aesthetically, but in your line of work, you are. A good book that I regularly read, and is stored with credible philosophical statements, it mentioned this about feelings. Quote, "Guard your heart more than anything, because out of it are the issues of life. And he that trusts in his own heart is a fool, but whoever walks wisely will be kept safe." End quote. Let me dissect these two statements. The first one is pertaining to controlling how much you disclose to a stranger, even a good friend or partner. Trustworthiness must be established without a doubt before you can share sacred parts of yourself. Out of our thoughts and feelings come from the experiences we had in life. That's why we must protect ourselves by being selective in our speech. Otherwise, the likelihood of getting manipulated enlarges. The second quote is depicting exactly what I have been explaining. Being tyrannically independent and operating in the essence of entitlement will make you foolish, indeed. Just look at those who live that way. Are they people with integrity or good role models? Probably not. We know that there's always an opposite to everything, howbeit, those who choose to do things prudently are consistently reverent as wise, which keeps them safe, because they know how to maneuver through situations that are not opportune. Now, if you've listened this far, you're probably wondering why I haven't spoken much about forgiveness, but rather only mentioned it briefly in my opening statements. There's a reason for everything under the sun, and in the next moments, you will realize that reason. I'd like to provide you with 3 principles that you can begin using at this very moment. Since we tend to have a short memory span, especially with all the peripheral distractions, I suggest listening to this audio regularly or at a convenient time so that you can retain the information. You can also get a notepad or a scrapbook and jot down each principle on paper. Pause the audio when needed as you're listening. These are the principles of forgiveness. The first principle is forgiving everyone. In order for you to walk in psychological freedom rather than bondage, you must acquit all offenses that have been done to you by others. Have you been mocked? Forgive those who mocked you. Have you been sexually harassed? Forgive that person accordingly, because God sees it all. Has someone you genuinely loved and cared for shattered your heart? Forgive them, because they may not know what they are doing. It's subconscious. Understand that, unfortunately, a large amount of people are impolite and emotionally inadequate. However, there's a time to love and a time to hate, and a time of war, and then a time of peace. Surely, you will not forget what has been done, but you must forgive from a genuine place with no agenda behind it. When considering this act of forbearance, you are also considering how healthy or deranged the individual can be. Try not to take anything so personal when a stranger does something that may trigger you. You have to understand that most people are in the habit of toxic behaviors, and it's second nature without thought. It's how they were raised. As I mentioned, people are a byproduct of their environment, and they rarely change. For those who believe in Christ, we know that we must walk in love. I recall the statement that was given by Paul to the people in Colossae, which is today Turkey. He said, "Be tolerant of one another and forgive each other if anyone has a complaint against another. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, you also should forgive." After all, most of what they are doing is what they believe is conventional. Most people are making decisions from a position of unfulfillment or pride, and not from a heart of love. You see, no one owes you an apology or even respect, but if you intend to live a life of peace, dignity, and strength, then you are obligated to the state of being apologetic. is the humility that you must have to operate in this manner, because it takes a diligent amount of fortitude to forgive when it's far easier to hold contempt. Think about all the people who have hurt you, lied to you, or deceived you. Forgive them. Forgive them all, because it is a true key to diminishing the burden of self-consciousness or shame. No one is without fault. We all have fallen short of the glory of God, so stop trying to create a facade of a good person, because no one is good but He. We are only good if we follow the morality of truth. This is what makes us good, but not in ourselves or what society regards as good. Do your best to follow the truth, and then you'll be made free. People do things intentionally or unintentionally, but that doesn't matter. What's most important is that you realize holding someone accountable for an inconvenient action doesn't mean that they will accept that accountability. It's similar to when that man Jesus was hanging on a cross, and in the midst of excruciating agony and punctures into his side with spears, he uttered the words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." If you ask me, not only was this man dying for the sins of the world in that very moment, but he was still praying for those who were literally murdering him in broad daylight up until his last breath. There was a young man named Stephen who experienced a similar yet less intense death. He was being stoned for telling the truth to elders in his own town. They threw bricks and rocks at him because they felt offended. While the crowd of elders were throwing debris and large stones, Stephen, looking up at the sky, he fell down to his knees and loudly said, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." After he said this, he died from head trauma and internal bleeding in his organs. So, for your own sanity and mental health, it is immensely critical that you release yourself from ill will or potential hatred that could seep into other aspects of your life by forgiving others for their wrongs. Don't be combative much in the attempt to be your own victor, because that will not go well. If you are within your right as a citizen to defend yourself from harm or potential threats, then exercise your right to protection. There are cases where voluntary aggression has erupted from a small matter, like a healthy debate or indecision amongst a couple. A lot of healing can be made with just this one word, and it's a big step of relief when you actually say, "I forgive you," to whomever. It is also none of your concern if someone accepts or denies your initiative to forgive. You cannot force anyone to be receptive of it. Forgive a person even if you believe they don't deserve it. You see, it's a one-man sport, individualistic, and it challenges everything you were taught. This isn't about the other person per se, it's about you. Again, everyone has baggage. Some have more than others, and you must sacrifice protecting your happiness than allowing outsiders to ruin yours. I believe that the drought of successful marriages are directly connected to not practicing forgiveness. I mean, you married each other for a reason. Whether that reason was for financial stability, access to reasonable sex, or combining your genes to create a good legacy. I read an article from HuffPost stating that one of the main reasons of these failed unions is because of the excuse in outgrowing the spouse. Ridiculous. This is the result of not taking the proper time to vet each other for compatibility in the acquaintance phase. This is what I was referring to when I mentioned people make illogical decisions when driven by feelings. If you have had a part in a divorce or a breakup in a romantic relationship, or even if you weren't the reason for the termination, forgive that person and hold yourself accountable for the things you've done. Learn and develop for the better. Forgive them for the blunt decision. Forgive them for maybe committing infidelity, setting an emotional and, in some cases, financial obstacle upon you, or the children, if applicable. Sometimes these circumstances are catastrophic and demoralizing, and then again, other times they can be motivational to improve one's life. It's okay to be distant and express forgiveness. You don't necessarily need to amend in person or be in close proximity to implement this. You don't even need to be face to face or speak to the person at all. This can be done solely from your end with sincerity. The notion here is to forgive with love so that you will not be succumbed to destructive remedies and pacifying the attacks on your self-esteem. The purpose of forgiving is to endorse selflessness in a world that's full of egotism. The second principle is acknowledging your faults. You have committed treacherous behaviors towards someone in your life. We all have. You may have not murdered or subjected yourself to burglary, which are the extremes on the spectrum, but nonetheless, we all fell victim to being rebellious one point in time or another. It's quite possible that you have told a white lie or cooperated in a mischievous act. So then, you need to humble yourself and admit to all of your portions and bad behaviors. The leader of the 12, who was Peter, had asked Jesus a question in regards to the limit to forgiveness. Peter came up to the Lord and asked, "How many times should I forgive someone who does something wrong to me? Is 7 times enough?" Jesus answered, "Not just 7 times, but 70 times 7. If you multiply 7 times 70, you will see that the number is 539. 539 times we should forgive an individual. Now that number is figurative and not literal. It's a metaphorical meaning which equates to unlimited. The intention is to have an abundant presence so that when offenses occur, you will be able to pardon those offenses every time without malice. The third principle is asking for forgiveness. It's mature of a person to recognize their own faults, but it's more of character when a person can absolve to ask for forgiveness. Sometimes the opportunity to express this act of humility isn't available, and you have to do it internally. Perhaps the person you want to ask forgiveness of has died, or the person moved to another city and you have no contact. What about if a friendship or a romantic relationship has faltered badly and you had the time to reflect, but don't think it's beneficial to set up a meeting for discussion? Usually, if a situation ended on bad terms, it's not worth inviting that drama back into your life. The only alternative is to confess in secret spiritually, and then when you find yourself in a similar circumstance, you will know how to maturely handle it and provide sound counsel to the youth when it's relevant. Contrary to what is believed, you cannot forgive yourself. No one can. It's like getting a common cold and letting your immune system combat the germs causing the illness without any medicinal aid. If an adult is detained for disobeying the law, will that person free themselves from the detainment, or will it take a representative like a lawyer to bid on the person's behalf so that they may be released? God will forgive you and will not bring to remembrance any of your wrongdoings when you forgive others of theirs. However, if you do not, then God will not forgive you of all of your poor decisions. The brother of Jesus, James, wrote this, quote, "Confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much." End quote. Everyone will have a level of misconduct. However, the task is to forgive them even if they commit an irrational act that will potentially cause damage to you or themselves. Learn to forgive and sympathize for people from a distance, and to remain separate from groups that do not comport to you. Be mindful and considerate, even if you are being treated with contempt or disdain. Matthew attentively wrote a statement that Jesus said in regards to this principle, and it read, quote, "For if you forgive other people for their offenses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive other people, then your Father will not forgive your offenses." End quote. There's powerful advantages to this forgiveness thing, and we should all try to implement it as much as possible in our daily lives. In conclusion, if you consider following these 3 principles and applying them today, whether you are a believer or not, your life will be peaceful and rewarding. The greatest weapon of defense is the posterity of forgiveness, because nothing will be capable of affecting you, whether mentally or spiritually. In turn, there will be no weapon formed against you that will prosper. Thank you.